Hi, I'm Kathy Smith, the director of the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society here at Community College of Philadelphia. Today's Perspective interview features David Travascus, pro bono coordinator of the Pennsylvania Bar and Center Advisory Board member, speaking to Ronald Castille. Mr. Castille served as Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court from 2008 to the end of 2014. He was first elected to the court in 1993 and retained in 2013. A wounded veteran, Castille served as a Marine platoon leader in Vietnam. He also previously served as District Attorney of Philadelphia. I think you'll enjoy this important conversation today.
Welcome to the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Travascus, adjunct professor in the Paralegal Studies curriculum here at the college. Today, my guest is the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Ronald Castille. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, David.
Like many Philadelphians, sons of Philadelphia, people we have adopted, you didn't grow up here. Can you tell us about how you came to come to Philadelphia?
Well, I actually grew up in the Air Force. My father was a B-17 bomber pilot in World War II when I was born in 1944, and then he got out after World War II and then went back in for Korea. And then after the Korean War, he stayed as a career in the Air Force. So I've lived all over the world. I went to high school in Wisconsin, Hialeah, Florida, and Fukuoka, Japan. I always tell people when we were in Japan as high school students, our senior class trip was to Hiroshima, the place where they dropped the first atomic bomb on a population. And it was pretty astounding when we're 16, 17 going to that place. But I ended up, I went to Auburn University afterwards on a Navy ROTC scholarship. And when I graduated from there, I joined the Marine Corps. I was an officer in the Marine Corps. I was in Vietnam I was a platoon commander, which is infantry, and I was pretty severely wounded. In fact, my platoon sergeant, Angel Mendez, pulled me out of the rice paddy when I lay wounded, and he actually died himself from wounds while he pulled me out of the battlefield and saved my life, basically. So I ended up in the Navy hospital in Bethesda, and then after I was triaged and was able to, get back to a normal, not normal, but a semblance of health. They shipped me to the Philadelphia Navy Hospital, which at that time was the orthopedic center for anyone whose home of record was east of the Mississippi River, and my home of record was Miami. So I ended up in Philadelphia on the back of a Navy ambulance. I had never been here in my life. I didn't know one person, and they dropped me off at the hospital and said, good luck, Lieutenant.
That's an amazing introduction to the city. So what made you decide that this would be a place you would want to stay?
The people that treated us so nicely at the Navy hospital, we had a lot of volunteers that would come in there, and the doctors and everyone else were military personnel, U.S. Navy. They treat the Marine Corps, but I'd never lived in a big city, and they would take us from the hospital to oversee the Sixers games and baseball and things like that. And I eventually spent 9 months in the Navy hospital, and then they released me from the service as they were through with me. But I grew to love all the amenities of Philadelphia. The people were great. Restaurants were great at that time. So even though I went to law school at University of Virginia after I got out of the Navy hospital, I came back and worked one summer in the city solicitor's office in Philadelphia.
Oh my goodness, who was the solicitor then?
It was Levy Anderson, way back. So I said I want to start my career here as an attorney, and upon graduation I was offered a position by Arlen Specter in the DA's office, and he was our district attorney at that time. With first assistant was Dick Sprague, who's now a really great lawyer, and Philadelphia. So I said, yeah, I think I'd like to be a prosecutor and do that kind of work, helping the citizens out and trying to do justice on behalf of the victims and eliminating some of the bad characters from the street for sometimes death penalty, life, significant amount of years.
And that really was a glorious time in the history of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. Many of the people that we think of as great legal leaders today all came out of the office then. Your colleagues then and your peers were people like Ed Rendell and others like that.
Yeah, Lynn Abraham was in the office at that time, Ed Rendell. A lot of sitting judges were in the office. One of the individuals became the Inspector General of Pennsylvania, Peter Smith. He's now a U.S. attorney. So we had a lot of individuals who, our inspector really turned the DA's office around from what it was more like a political hiring type place. And Arlen would go to some of the top law schools in the East Coast, not so much the West Coast, although we did have people from California. But he would try and seek the best and the brightest for that office. And I interviewed at the University of Virginia when I was in law school there.
Now, you were in the DA's office for a long time, eventually heading it up for a number of years.
Yeah, I started off as an assistant DA, and I enjoyed the trial work. I like to be in front of a jury, trying to convict an individual who's charged with serious type crimes. So that was sort of my milieu. I was offered administrative positions in the office, but I said, no, I just want to try cases. The first administrative position I took was after about 10 years. I was chief of the career criminal unit, which was the worst people in the system would come in front of us. You had to have 3 prior felony convictions for crimes of violence, and then you'd come in front of us, and it was just pure prosecution. There was no negotiating, guilty pleas or anything like that. And then I was deputy DA under Ed Rendell when he was the DA. And then when Ed decided he'd run for mayor, I said, well, I think I'll run for DA myself. And that was after 14 years in the office. And I ran as a Republican in Philadelphia. And at that time, the Democrats outnumbered the Republicans by 4-1. So I won in a landslide. So that means that the citizens appreciated what I had done. My time in the military, the awards I had, and then my dedication to protecting the citizens of Philadelphia through prosecuting some of the worst individuals. And then I was reelected by the citizens of Philadelphia for a second time.
Now, when did you decide to think about going onto the court?
I really hadn't thought about it too much. After I ran for mayor in the primary against Frank Rizzo and Sam Katz, and I came within 200 votes of being the mayoral candidate of the Republican Party at that time, and that's when Ed Rendell was running on the Democratic side for mayor. And I was in one of the law firms, and I was called out of the blue by the head of the Republican statewide party, Ann Anstein, and she asked me, she said, we're looking for a candidate to run for Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. And when she said I was the candidate they were looking for, I was a little somewhat taken aback, because you think of the Supreme Court as these old white-haired, ladies and gentlemen, and I was only 49 years old at that time. So it was a chance to get back into public service, and it was a challenge that I thought I was ready for. I was really a trial lawyer, but a lot of the things that come to our Supreme Court are from trials. So I signed up to run for the Supreme Court, and I won that election against 2 other individuals who were running at that time. And so not only did the citizens of Philadelphia embrace me as an outsider, but the citizens of the state of Pennsylvania also brought me into the public sphere again. And I was retained twice. I've been retained twice. Just last year was the last one.
Many of our people watching this on CCP TV may not understand how our court system works, but we elect our judges at every level, including the state Supreme Court. You run in a political race the first time, and then after 10 years, it's a retention, yes or no.
Correct.
So you won a race statewide, and then you've had 2 retentions since then in the 21 years that you've been on the court.
That's correct.
Now, most of the people watching this, all of our audience is Philadelphians. They probably don't have much of a sense of what the rest of the state is like. You travel all over the state. What was it like when you did your first campaign statewide?
It's a big state. I mean, it's 400 miles one way and 250 the other way. And we put on like 35,000 miles on our campaign vehicle, and that didn't count, airfare here, air flights from here to there to Erie. And the one thing I did learn is there's no way you can get from Philadelphia to Erie easily.
No, it's a long way.
But the state of Pennsylvania is beautiful. I mean, as you go west, you're in these beautiful mountains, and it's very rural in many areas, and vast swaths of forest, and it's a beautiful country and a beautiful state. And most of the people I met were interested in what I was doing and why I should be on the court. Although a lot of people don't really know what the Supreme Court does. So sometimes you had to explain to them that we were the court of last resort. So if you can't get justice anywhere else, you end up in front of us and hoping you do.
Well, and our court has some powers that the United States Supreme Court doesn't have. I think a lot of our audience thinks that the state Supreme Court must mirror what the United States Supreme Court does. And things like the king bench power that you have is a powerful tool that isn't available to the U.S. Supreme Court. And could you just explain that to our audience, what the king's bench power gives you the power to do?
The king's bench refers to England. We're a colony of England at that time, but in the 1722 Constitution of Pennsylvania, we were formally given the king's bench power. And the king's bench refers to the King of England's courts at Westminster in 1722, Exchequer and Common Pleas. And at that time, the king's bench, you could appeal any case in the system directly to the king's bench and ask for the jurisdiction of the king's bench, even skipping other layers of the court system. And just vice versa, the king's bench could take any case in the system and bring it right up to the king's bench. So it's a tool that the U.S. Supreme Court does not have, because you have to go through the different layers of the federal court. So we can reach down on a case that's important enough, even like a traffic court case in Philadelphia, we can reach down and bring that up to us. And if an individual in the lower courts of the states, the municipal court of Philadelphia, they can appeal to us under King's Bench, but it's a power we don't use a lot. It's only the most extraordinary circumstances where we will intervene down below on the King's Bench because of what it is, and we use it very sparingly and only in the most important cases. But it was given to us in the Constitution of 1722 and has been carried forth from every constitution till the present.
The other thing that I think a lot of the people watching this think is that because if they've had a civics class, and we hope they've all had good civics classes, they've learned that the United States Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and yet the Pennsylvania Supreme Court can differ from the U.S. Supreme Court. And how can that be? I know that we've made changes in cases like drug testing and others. Our decisions do not mimic word for word the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah, the U.S. Supreme Court and the U.S. Constitution is the basic law of the land, but we in Pennsylvania can provide greater rights under our authority as the Supreme Court. So, say, for instance, search and seizure laws, a lot of it's set by the U.S. Supreme Court, but because our Constitution is worded differently, we look at search and seizure from a different standard than the U.S. Supreme Court, and we can grant greater rights to privacy on search and seizure areas than the Supreme Court does. So we do have a different power. As opposed to the Supreme Court, we're a separate branch of government, as is the Supreme Court, but we have administrative authority over all the courts and all the court personnel in the state of Pennsylvania, where the U.S. Supreme Court is much more limited because of the hierarchical structures of their court system, and they have to answer to Congress more than we have to answer to the state legislature. The Congress can write the rules for the U.S. Supreme Court. We write our own rules for our court system in Pennsylvania, and we're the ones that are always, me basically going to Harrisburg to fight for funding for the system because, we are a separate branch of government. We're a constitutionally authorized branch, and I sometimes have to convince the legislature that we have to be fully funded, and we're careful with our money. We're not extravagant. We're caretakers of the taxpayers' dollars. So we run efficiently, and but we need the resources that we have to do our job. And sometimes there's clashes with the legislature, or the governor, when they want to do something one way, and we say, well, you really can't do it that way because it's unconstitutional or beyond the authority of the statutes that you've passed, legitimately in the state legislature.
Well, and it is amazing the differences when you actually dig down deep. The obvious difference is that we only have 7 justices on the state Supreme Court. And in terms of the Chief Justice, the role you have, in Pennsylvania, unlike the United States Supreme Court, where the Chief Justice is separately nominated to be chief and has to be confirmed by the United States Senate, in Pennsylvania, the chief becomes chief by virtue of seniority on the court. Not age, but seniority on the court.
Right, seniority on the court, length of service, basically. So I've been the Chief Justice. I've been the senior person on the court since 2008 when I became the Chief Justice upon the retirement of Chief Justice Ralph Cappy.
And the other biggest difference is that at age 70, the year you turn 70, the end of that year, all judges in Pennsylvania must retire.
That's correct. That's the constitutional provision that applies to all judges in Pennsylvania. You can be a senior judge after that, but you don't have the same authority as a regular judge, and that you're not involved in administrative aspects of an office. But you're a senior judge. You can be appointed to assist counties or that need extra judicial service because of illness, of a judge, or a judge dies or retires, and we have to wait for another election cycle to replace that person. So senior judges are very valuable to us in Pennsylvania, and there's about 200 senior judges at any one time that we can call upon to serve, even in our court if we wanted to, but the Superior Court, the Commonwealth Court, the Common Pleas, and the magisterial district level. So they provide a great service when there's vacancies.
Well, let's now talk a little bit about your court, because you have been Chief Justice since 2008. What do you think are the greatest accomplishments of your tenure as Chief Justice?
Well, as a justice, I've written 409 majority opinions that are now the law of Pennsylvania and will be for a long time.
And that's over the 21 years?
That's over the 21 years. I've also had 230 dissenting opinions, which some of those become the majority as time goes on and people see the wisdom of my legal ability. So that's that particular aspect of the court system. Judging in opinions is what I've done.
And not to interrupt you, I apologize for that, but when I talk to children about the court and I talk about writing an opinion, the kids always say to me, well, if I was the Chief Justice and I got to decide if I'm on the majority side who writes the opinion, I would give it to somebody I didn't like because I don't want to do all that work. But when you get to write an opinion, it really is writing history.
Any opinion that I write or have written will be cited later on for decades, perhaps, as precedent. So the lawyers and litigants and individuals, 30 years from now will be picking up a law book and say, like, Chief Justice Castille said in X, Y, and Z opinion that's the law.
And I've read some of your opinions. They're not one-page papers with a couple of footnotes. These are incredibly detailed and deep pieces.
Well, these are the major issues we take. We had a case the other day, and we were on television. I decided that the citizen should be able to see us on television on PCN, but we had a case on the dog law of Pennsylvania, and I had basically had to explain to the citizens why we're taking up a case on the dog law of Pennsylvania. And I said, because it applies to every dog owner in the state of Pennsylvania. So those are the kind of cases that we do take. And some of them are extremely complicated. When we're talking about the restatement of torts, the second or the third, which one is Pennsylvania going to adopt, or are we going to do that? Some of them are highly technical. I wrote one opinion that was 30 pages long, and it talked about 30,000 parts per liter of mercury emissions. When do you go over the limit, how you go over the limit, who decides the limit. And probably nobody understood that case because it was so complicated. But it applied to every coal-fired plant in Pennsylvania about emissions, mercury emissions. So
that has a huge impact across the state, and
correct.
A huge impact really on our citizens.
Correct. The thing I'm most proud of and that I've accomplished is in 2008 when I became Chief Justice. That's when the economy, the bottom dropped out of the economy, and states and governments were running way short of revenue at that period of time. And we tried to cut back. We tried to be more economical. But other states' courts were closing. Like New Hampshire, for instance, had all of their civil cases were postponed for an entire year, so you couldn't get a civil case heard because of the lack of funding in New Hampshire. The thing I've been proud of is we've been able to, during these tough times, and we're still in them as we speak, as we sit here, we haven't had to close one courtroom for one day during that time because I've fought for funding for the court system. I've been able to convince the legislature and the governor that we are an independent and important branch of government, and you can't really shut us down. It would be unconstitutional, but we have to be available to the citizens to dispense justice. And if you closed all the civil courts for a year in Pennsylvania, that would be a disaster to businesses, citizens, whoever, even to the government. So we've been able to keep all the courts open for this entire 7 years that I've been Chief Justice.
Which is an amazing thing. I have worked with you in the peripheral in pushing for access to justice. And I know you are a great champion of access to justice, which when I talk about it, I'm talking about civil justice. But because your background was as a criminal prosecutor, what do you think about how we're dispensing first criminal justice and then we'll look at civil justice in our courts of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think a lot of my present attitude comes from my work as a prosecutor, where you'd see some of the most vulnerable citizens of Pennsylvania, of Philadelphia, who would be victims of crimes. Poor people in their neighborhoods would be going to work, and have, jobs that help them survive, and people would be burglarizing their houses and things like that. So I always had an empathy for the victim, not so much for the criminal. I mean, they deserve what they got, a fair trial and swift and significant punishment. So I think it's probably made me more sensitive to the needs of individuals. In the criminal court system, lawyers are supplied for all the criminals if they cannot afford a lawyer. The civil system is a little different in that you have to pay a lawyer. They're professionals. They deserve compensation for what they do. But if you can't, there are some significant legal situations that you can face as an individual and as a citizen where you really need the services of a lawyer to just wind your way through the court system. And sometimes it can be very difficult to do that. Our Constitution provides that you can be your own lawyer. Right. You can represent yourself if you wish. But that's a daunting task if you're in a court and you're fighting for, say, custody of a child, or the bank wants to take your house from you and you don't have the wherewithal to hire a lawyer or turn to a lawyer. Then there are services available through legal services corporations. In Philadelphia's Community Legal Services. And those are a lot of dedicated lawyers who would rather work in the field or rather work directly with individuals rather than being in some tower downtown in Philadelphia, who are providing these services. But of course, the need for the services greatly outstretches the services that are available. And I think the estimate is they have to turn away about 3 out of every 4 individuals that come in front of that ask for those legal services. So.
And I think that's right here in Philadelphia, where we not only have community legal services, we have Philadelphia Legal Assistance,
right.
and we have a wide array of specialty programs that help, from the Support Center for Child Advocacy all the
Right.
way to the Senior Law Center. We have tons of programs
Right,
that
right.
especially help people.
Even the Bar Association has volunteers, a special program.
The VIP program, Volunteer Indigent
where,
Program.
Where lawyers who are working in regular legal positions who are willing to give up their time to work in these programs because they see they are lawyers, they're proud of what they have, and they're thankful for what they have, and they feel they have to give back. So the term is pro bono. It means for free or gratis. So there's a lot of lawyers who are willing to do that pro bono, and we're thankful for that. So.
Well, and that work for the good of the system and the good of the community is wonderful. One of the things that your court has done, which I think has really helped people access justice, and recently all the family court documents, you've required that every county court, and we have 67 counties, 60 judicial districts. Pennsylvania is a
Right.
very diverse place for a unified judicial system.
Right.
But you've required that every court have all of its local family court documents available on its website so people can find them, and they must have uniform forms. So if somebody can get help from a person in Philadelphia, they can do that in Venango County across the state.
Right, right. We try to make it easier for a person who cannot afford an attorney and want to represent themselves to go through the system by having forms available online that they can actually use to go argue their case in front of a judge. The largest group of individuals are these family law cases, with divorces and the protection from abuse orders, adoptions, things like that. That's where the pressing need is for legal services, and it helps the system too, because it helps some judge. The person will come in and they won't stumble around. They'll have the form that says this is what, this is it, Your Honor, and then the judge can ask questions and try and adjudicate the case correctly.
We've had a lot of years of trying to put everything in plain English, but there still is a language of the court that's different than a lay language.
Well, we don't use many Latin terms anymore, even though I just use the pro bono and gratis. Those are both Latin terms. But yeah, we try to make the system less impenetrable. If you ever see these old movies with the English system, with the wigs and the robes, and you see the formality that you have to go through to just present your case. So it's a different time, and people need legal help, and we try to make the system less opaque and more open, and that's important. If you're somebody that wants to come into the system or in the system involuntarily, it's nice that you understand what's going on,
Right.
Even whatever the level of your education is.
Well, and that's actually always the tough thing. We have our PALawHelp.org website that has a lot of materials and a lot of information and even some forms that can be filled out. We now have the court forms, but it still takes a certain amount of education. And if you have difficulty reading or something like that, you really do need a lawyer.
Right.
And that's where your leadership, I think, people probably didn't expect to have a person who came from a prosecutorial background to be such a champion of civil legal aid. And one of the ways that you've done it is actually make lawyers pay up. And do you want to talk about that? Because you really are responsible for millions of dollars coming into the system from lawyers.
Yeah, the lawyers have stepped up. A lot of lawyers, as I said earlier, will do pro bono work for free. But I wanted to make sure that every lawyer is doing something. So I was able to convince my court to add a $25 fee to the lawyer registration fee, which is $175 that you had to pay to practice law in the state of Pennsylvania. We added $25 to that, and there's 67,000 attorneys in Pennsylvania. They may work elsewhere, but they have Pennsylvania registration. And that $25 from each one of those goes to the Interest on Lawyers Trust Account Board, which is a board that of the Supreme Court that distributes this money down to the local agencies, some of which you've talked about, Women Against Abuse and things like that, legal services right here in the state of Pennsylvania. And I haven't heard one lawyer complain about that. And our filing fee is $200, which it puts us in the lower quartile of the hierarchy of what you have to pay to be an attorney. If you want to be an attorney in Hawaii, it costs you $900.
Wow. So in essence, we're making people pay to play, but they're helping out those who cannot pay to play.
Correct.
And you've also you alluded earlier to the fact that the people who make their careers in legal aid often take lower salaries and work for lower salaries than they might make in a private practice. And some of those salaries across the state are very, very low. These are oftentimes young lawyers coming into the practice with huge debt burdens from being law students and going through law school. And you've also been very creative in finding funding to help support loans directed for them.
Yeah, we started a loan repayment assistance program for an individual who, like you described, works for legal services. They're loaded with debt, from college a lot of times and law school. So we help them pay off their debt to the tune of it was $3,500 for the first year. If you work for a year, we'll give you $3,500 to pay off your debt. $45,000 the second year, and then $6,000 the third year, as long as you stay employed. And you can get that all the way up to 10 years, which is $54,000. So by that, we're encouraging or allowing individuals who have some of this debt to be able to stay in these legal services and do what they really want to do, give back to the citizens. And it's all financed by outside lawyers who come into Pennsylvania and file cases in our court system. It's called pro hoc vice, and we make every outside attorney pay the same registration fee as a Pennsylvania attorney, the $200. And all of that pro hoc vice goes to pay these loan repayment assistance programs. So there's no filing fees, no taxes, no citizens revenue that's used in it. It's all strictly from these individuals coming in and filing lawsuits in Pennsylvania.
It is amazing, and when we look at the way we try to fund civil legal aid, because there is federal money that comes through the federal legislature, there's state money that comes through the state legislature, but it really is a hodgepodge that you've cobbled together to greatly extend the resources. And one of the things that you've done is you've sort of become a bank buster or a beater up of banks. I don't know the reputation you have with the banks, because attorneys, and when you started your career, attorneys could have money they were holding for clients. I sell a house, you haven't gotten the money from me yet because it's an escrow. It's sitting in an attorney's account. For many years, that just was basically left for the attorneys, and any benefit the bank got by having interest on that money, if they did anything, it went to the attorneys.
Right.
During the time that you've been on the court, we've moved from a voluntary system where attorneys could give up that interest to a mandatory system, interest on attorneys' trust accounts. The very IALTA program that you talked about started for that. But one of the things that has come under your leadership as chief is that you've gone to the banks who weren't treating those accounts with the same kind of courtesy in terms of interest rate that they were treating other accounts.
Right.
And how successful has that been?
That's been really successful. Some of the interest would be minuscule, like if you're a lawyer and you get a check from an insurance company, you put it in the bank, and then like 3 days later you send a check to your client. Well, that draws interest while it's there for those 3 days or whatever the time is. But sometimes it's so minuscule, it could be like 75 cents. So we have, under the Interest on Lawyers Trust Account program, we have the banks accounting for all those little small amounts of interest. And then those, by our rules, go to the IALTA board to be distributed to the legal services agencies. So that did provide a lot of funding when interest rates on banks
were high.
12, 13%. Now they're like 0.5% if you're lucky. But we do have any banks that participate in the IALTA program, they have to pay the same amount of interest as they pay to their best customers. And most of the banks are doing that. We have a list of about 300 banks that do that. But if they don't do that, then they can't. They won't have lawyers' trust account funds in their banks. So, at one time when the interest rate was high, it provided $13.5 million to go legal services, and this past year it was about $3.5 million. So we've had to scramble to find other sources of funds, because even in this tough times, legal requirements or legal needs of individuals rise. There's some people are losing their homes. Some people are frustrated. They become abusive physically or whatever. So the need is even greater in these times, but then the revenues are less, and the legislature hasn't really stepped up. They've been willing to allow filing fees, but the legislative contribution to legal services for the last 25 years have been $2 million a year.
And it's interesting because what you were talking about, the unintended consequences of something like losing your home, you might then become involved in a criminal behavior.
Right.
That then has huge costs to the rest of our community, because we're going to have to pay to have that person tried. We're going to have to pay to have that person in jail. And if we could have just saved their home, that might have been a person who, if their house could have been saved, wouldn't have gone down those other roads. I think the statistic that the legal services people say is that for every dollar spent on legal aid is basically saving us $11 across the rest of the system.
Yeah, that's probably correct, but some people can't see that. It's not.
Well, and sometimes the legislature, because it's not their system, it's saving the $11. It's the court system and other pieces of it.
Right.
You talked early about how we have so many people who come into family court on their own, and in Philadelphia that number's upwards of 90% representing themselves. Yeah. For many, many years, our family court in Philadelphia was all over the place. We had right on the Parkway, we had a huge building that did family court.
Juvenile delinquency.
Right. We had the court down by 11th and Market, that place there, which looked like a warehouse for family court.
It was terrible.
And we had some other places. One of the great accomplishments of your tenure is that Philadelphia is having a new family court. And do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we just dedicated a new family court, probably a $175 million project. We just did it last week, which, if you're looking at this from 30 years from now, I can't give you the exact date, but it's a $175 million family courthouse at 15th and Arch Street. It's a modern courthouse. It's highly technical. It's got the efficiencies that a new family court, any court building needs that serves the public, and it's a consolidation of the old place at South 11th and the one over on the Parkway, which is a beautiful building, which is now going to be a hotel. So it's the people would be able to come there, and some of the facilities of the family court were terrible because it was a commercial building, and the owners weren't too thrilled with trying to keep it up. So we now have a modern, brand new courthouse where all of these cases, both delinquency and dependency, can now be tried in a truly safe situation, efficient situation, and it lends dignity to the system. Because if you go to some office building, you say, "Well, is this really the court?" And you come into this building, and you realize you are in a court, and that it's a structure that's going to last for a long time in the city of Philadelphia. And we're really proud. It took me about 6 years of work to do this, while I'm still the Chief Justice at the same time. But it needed someone with my power, political drag to get it. And then Ed Rendell was the governor at the time, so he, of course, knew Philadelphia intimately, as I did. And we were able to work together to get the legislature to fund the building. So Governor Corbett could have, when he came in, he could have stopped the project, but he saw the need for it too. So it's now a reality.
No, and that is a really great thing. I used to tell people when they would be meeting me in municipal court, because the municipal court was next door to the family court at South 11th. I said, if you go into a building where you feel sort of like you're in a cattle drive and you're a little scared, you're in the wrong building. That's family court.
Right.
And that isn't the way family court should be.
Right.
This building, people will be able to walk in, feel safe. If they have a protection from abuse, they won't be riding the elevator with the person
Right.
who's abusing them. They're going to have separate entrances and separate access points. And you really designed that looking at the best practices around the country and using a host of local people to make that court work.
Yeah, we had local construction, union guys. We had architects were local. I enlisted the services of 2 judges, a family court judge, Judge Murphy, and the juvenile court judge, Judge Doherty, and because they know the system, they know what a courthouse needs. So you don't need somebody. You do need somebody who's a designer that can design it, but you need some people like those 2 judges who have been in the system, and all the judges in family court that know exactly what you need. And this building will fulfill all of those needs, both on a design level and on a functioning level. The PFA's, protection from abusers, a section for the men and a section for the women, so they don't mingle. In the old building, a lot of these women would hide in the ladies' room or in stairwells so they didn't have to be in the same hallway or sitting next to their accuser. So all of these are taken into effect so that the court will be efficient that way.
Well, now we've talked a lot about successes, and there have been a tremendous number of successes. When you look back on your tenure as chief and your time on the court, what wish do you have that you wish you could still change? What would you like to do?
Well, I wish we would have had adequate funding, so I didn't have to. I spent an inordinate amount of time going to the legislature and trying to convince people that we're an equal branch of government. And
you did pretty much everything but hold a bake sale.
Yeah.
And actually, we didn't even talk about that. The Cypre Awards are a little bit of a bake sale.
Yeah.
You found money through large class actions that had residual funds, and you arranged that those funds be half of those funds. Any Pennsylvania court that has a large residual fund from a class action, half of that goes to the IOLTA board.
Right, and then that's distributed to.
Yeah.
That can be significant. We had one Cypre Award that's leftover money from the class action that was $1.75 million, and that was given to us by the state of Washington by one of their Cypre programs that came, and that went directly to the IOLTA. Right. In Pennsylvania, for instance, there was a Cypre Award recently of $4 million. But
our local attorney, Alan Feldman, did that case
correct.
here.
That was great. So the judge ordered that to be distributed to really 2 agencies, the legal services here. Our rule says 50% of those has to go to the IOLTA fund, and then the judge and the lawyers can determine where the other 50% goes. So CLS, legal services, got $2 million, and then $2 million went to the IOLTA fund, and that's like free money, because otherwise it would go to some other charity. But my idea or my feeling was that if they're using the court system to get these awards, then they ought to help the people who can't afford a lawyer be able to access the system and get justice.
Right, but it would be wonderful if we had a fully funded justice system and all our legal aid programs and all our court programs. And even, it is amazing, and you must get very frustrated by this when you look around the state at the criminal defense, which is many places underfunded and differently funded.
Right. Well, on the civil side, there's an Access to Justice Commission, which has been going around and examining this situation, and they make an estimate that if you wanted to fully fund the entire civil case systems, it would cost about $50 million.
More a year on the court system.
Per year.
And what's your entire budget for the courts?
The entire budget for the state's part of the budget, the local counties carry part of it also, is $330 million. So you need another $50 million just.
Which would be a huge additional increase.
Huge, and we're still facing tough economic times. I thought maybe 4 years. The first filing fee was only going to be set for 4 years, because I thought at that time, 4 years of recession will be over. But here we are almost 8 years later, and we're still in the same situation. We've had to continue some of those filing fees, and they're all supposed to be temporary, but temporary depends on what happens with our economy.
So funding would be one of the biggest things that you wish that there was full funding.
Correct.
Other things that you would like to see, other things that you can concern, and it's still hard for you to talk about a lot of things because you are a sitting justice, which means you can't talk about anything that could be before you.
Well, I've wanted to do certain things that I probably won't have as much time now. Like next month, we're going to introduce the Elder Law Task Force report on elder law. About we have 1/4 of Pennsylvanians are elder above 65. We have the fourth largest elder population in the United States. So we want to address things that happen to the elderly. We've done a lot of things with the kids, through Max Baer and through our courts, getting kids out of foster care and things like that. So elder citizens are sometimes physically abused, mentally abused. Individuals who are supposed to be taking care of their finances have run off with the money. So we are trying to, we took a hard look at it about what we can do as a court to help protect senior citizens, and what the legislature can do as a legislature to pass legislation that can help the senior citizens. So that'll be next month. The one thing I've also tried to do is to straighten out the civil court system in Pennsylvania. We did a study where we found out of 165,000 civil cases in the courts in Pennsylvania that about half of them had been in the court system 2 years or longer. And 2 years is kind of the benchmark that where you should be able to move a civil case from start to finish. So one of the things we have done there is we have had every president judge in every county get rid of the cases that are stale or on the books or no one's done anything, they've been settled, to have an idea of how many cases we have, and then institute programs where these cases can now be disposed of from now on within 2 years, unless it's an exceptional kind of case or extenuating circumstances, the lawyer dies, who knows, things like that. So I'd like to have finished that. That's but it's going to be in effect, and it's we now have the public can actually access by the court's website the amount of cases in every county. So you could go in your own county and say, like, wow, what's in Venango County? How many cases are over 2 years of age, and you might want to start asking your local judges, why is that? So,
why are we having longer cases?
So that was huge. That was a big accomplishment. But
one of the things that I know is dear to your heart, but it is representative of something that is larger in your court. You've instituted veterans courts, and I know you were looking at veterans, and veterans of your era, the Vietnam War. We still have some of them in prison because they came back. We didn't talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome. We didn't talk about that maybe we should be giving our veterans a break. I don't know that anybody was thanking you for your service then. I know people today thank you for your service. And we tried to be very good about our returning veterans. Pennsylvania has done more than its fair share in these two wars recently. But you've instituted the idea of veterans courts. Now, they have to be implemented locally. And I think right now we have 18 of these veteran courts, including a very active one here in Philadelphia.
Yeah, correct.
But that's a sign of specialty courts overall. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the fact of specialty courts. And I know that some citizens watching this may say, well, why should a veteran get a break? And to me, it's obvious. If you've given your time and you've done your service, we should look out for you. But we also have drug courts. We have other kinds of specialty courts.
DUI.
And I didn't know if you wanted to speak to those, because that's a big change in the system.
We have DUI courts, mental health courts. There's a sexual violence court out in Pittsburgh that was just started. So there's probably about 110 of them right now. And the idea is to take people out of the system who are charged with a crime and put them in the non-traditional criminal track, put them in front of a judge and try and straighten them out. Basically, that's what it is. If you have a drinking problem, or if you're a veteran, you have alcohol, drug problems, homelessness, rather than run those individuals through the system, on the lower level criminal conduct, fighting or whatever they are, we will put them in front of a judge with a lot of therapists kind of things. They're called specialty courts, treatment courts. And the idea is to give that person a chance to go straight, basically. You get your time to do probation or do whatever it has to be done as part of the system. And if you complete that, then your record can be expunged and you can go on the rest of your life with being hopefully a productive citizen of Pennsylvania or wherever. So they're treatment courts in that we're treating the problem. We're not prosecuting them or putting them in jail for the problem. So those are successful. They save money, they save jail space, and most of all, they turn a lot of people around who, by whatever reason, drugs.
We get a
whatever.
veteran back who has post-traumatic stress, who's self-medicating, and then beats his wife, hurts his kid, gets into a fight with a neighbor, and is arrested. And instead of going into a regular system where they're going to be treated like an ordinary criminal, we have this program where they're before a judge who understands these things. Many of our judges there are veterans.
Right.
Many of the lawyers who work in those courts are veterans. And there are also lots of veteran programs and benefits that can be there.
Yeah, through the Veterans Administration. We have a lot of veteran mentors who volunteer to help guide, an individual who's kind of fallen off the wayside to success in these programs. So yeah, I'm a veteran myself. I lost my leg in combat in Vietnam. So when we came back, it was a different story than what's happening now, and people appreciate the service of individuals who are willing to actually go in harm's way and lose life, limb, whatever. So it's more appreciated now. But combat is still combat. If you want to talk about veterans and some of the things that you observe during combat, your buddy dying or whatever, like Angel Mendez, who basically died in my arms after he rescued me. They've contributed to society. So we have these courts that try and give back something to them specifically, so that they can become productive citizens, because they have veterans benefits and a lot of things like that. So and we help other, with DUI. Why should we be helping people who are inebriated? Well, we're trying to save them, from killing themselves or killing somebody else on the street, getting behind the wheel of a car. So they're pretty wide ranging. We have a big program to help people keep their houses. That's in the civil side, just to, because as you said, the one thing you don't want is an empty house on a street, because that's real problems in the city of Philadelphia with row houses. It attracts things you don't want in your neighborhood. And the banks don't really want these houses. I mean, they'd like to be paid for the house, but you can renegotiate the deals, and the banks are happy to walk away. And we've saved thousands and thousands. I think in Philadelphia alone, they said 7,500 houses have been saved through these special court programs that get the bank and the citizens together with volunteer lawyers, and they save these houses, and that's great. I mean, could you imagine 7,500 empty houses in the city of Philadelphia?
And that many families homeless and those kind of things.
No
It's an
problem.
amazing thing. I think when people say, they turn on this to see the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they may be thinking this will all just be about opinions and court cases and the appellate process. But it really is amazing the impact on daily life here in Philadelphia that your court has had.
You mentioned earlier about the U.S. Supreme Court. What's the difference? What I've been describing, for the last 45 minutes is how we are different than the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, they don't have specialty court programs. They don't even write their own rules. So we're a different kind of organization. Much different than them. And we're the court of last resort in the state of Pennsylvania. This is where you come to if you're seeking reversal of whatever happened to you down below, or affirmance of whatever happened to you down below. And there's very few appeals from our courts to the federal courts, although there are some. The state courts handle about 98% of all the court cases in the United States. And the federal courts have about 2%. So we're a different animal.
This is really where the people's work is done. And one of the things, and I think is appropriate to say, because every other year we have an election, and in some of those years we have elections for the state Supreme Court.
Right.
It depends on if there's a vacancy. We might have 80% of the registered people vote in a presidential election if it's a popular election. Yeah. That's still, I always, as a civics person, say that's still only half the people are registered, so that's only 40% of the people who could have voted. But in these off-years elections, sometimes we only get 18, 19, 20% of the people voting. Yeah. And what would you say to the citizens of Philadelphia about that duty they have to make sure that they go out and learn about who's running for the courts, all the court levels statewide, whether it's the local court here in Philadelphia, the Court of Common Pleas, whether it's one of the mid-level appellate courts, the Commonwealth Court or the Superior Court, or your Supreme Court? In the off-year elections, when there isn't the same energy about elections, what would you say to them about why it's important they get out there and vote?
Well, a lot of people don't think of the courts until they need the courts, or they're in front of the courts involuntarily, like a criminal charge. I tell the people, you know, we can have an important impact on your life, as criminal, even civil, as some of the things I've described. So I say it's your civic duty to get out there and vote for judges, and a lot of people don't even know they vote for judges because of the lack of civics education. But I do tell them, they say, like, who should I vote for? I said, well, whatever county you're in, Philadelphia, Bucks, I said, look to see what the bar associations of those different counties have done to review individuals who are going to be up for election, and take your advice from the lawyers. I mean, the lawyers are the ones who work in the system. They know the individuals in the system. It could be a fellow lawyer that they know who's now running for a higher office, or somebody who shouldn't be on the court. It's as simple as that. So I say, if you want to know about it, you know, go to the Bar Association. You can get it on the website now, and probably every county has a court review team, and it's really extensive in Philadelphia because of there's like 95 or 96 common pleas court judges and 27 or 28 municipal court judges, and then there's us. There's 15 on the Superior Court, 9 on the Commonwealth Court, and then 7 on our court. So it can have an impact on your life, and I say trust the lawyers.
Well, and it really can have more of an impact on your life than almost any other thing. And I think one of the things which is very exciting about the difference between the state court, where we elect judges, and the federal court, where they're nominated and then confirmed, is just when you look at the courts. Our Supreme Court had a Chief Justice who was an African American, long before the U.S. Supreme Court will ever have one. And our courts, when you look at Philadelphia, they look like the people of Philadelphia. Right. We've had Asian Pacific Rim men and women on the courts. Right. We have Hispanic, black, white. The full diversity of Philadelphia is shown in the court system. Right. And I think that's something that's obviously a great aspect of this, but people have to vote. Now, we have a final thing that we want to do for you, Justice. We do an award each year that we give to a judge who has helped the access to justice in the civil field. And what we are doing today is announcing and handing you that award from this time on will be named in your honor. Oh, okay. So the 2 judges who will get this award for 2014, and in the future, the Chief Justice Ronald D. Castille Judges Award, that will be the award that they get. And we want to thank you for your service, both from the time you were a veteran to your service through the District Attorney's Office and to your service as a Justice and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. You are a great son of Philadelphia, even if we had to get you on an ambulance coming up to the Naval Hospital. However we get you, we got you.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. That's wonderful. And a lot of my work has been trying to get legal services to the poorest people of Pennsylvania that can't afford it. And it's great that you're honoring individuals who are going to follow me and hopefully carry on with the same type of dedication. So that's great, and I think it's a wonderful award that you're initiating, and thank you for naming it after me.
Well, and here you go, sir, and thank you. That's all the time we have for today. I do want to thank my guest, the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Ron Castille, for joining us today. And I want to thank all of you who are watching this for tuning in. You have been watching the Fox Rothschild Center for Law and Society's Perspective series on CCP TV, the educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. I'm David Travaskis, an adjunct professor of paralegal studies, and we will see you next time on CCP TV.